Hi everyone, welcome to THT, and today we are going to talk about the Trilogy format, which is a new way to play the game that FFG has introduced in their stream on Tuesday. So I had a bit of time to think about it a little bit and see if this would be a good thing or a bad thing for the game. And yeah, I'm ready to give out my opinion, but first of all, I just want to tell you that this video is sponsored by Card Market, the biggest marketplace to buy and sell cards in Europe. So first of all, it's that the rules of the formats are fairly simple. It's the Hearthstone style constructed format where players get to play with 3 decks. They get to ban one of the opponent's deck, and then they will play the best of 3 with the 2 remaining decks. And I get to choose one deck, like in kind of hidden, as far as I understand. And yeah, that's basically how it sets. And you get to across the 3 decks you're playing. The deck building rules is like they cannot be sharing leaders, base, and you can only have maximum 3 copies of any single card across all 3 decks. So that's basically the rules. So first of all, and last but not least, very important, there is no ban list for that format. You can play with every single card in the game, including Triple Dark Raid, Django, Boba 1, and DJ. So I want to react to a few things that FFG has said in their article, which I think are either things that I think I disagree with, or things that I think are literally factually incorrect. So first of all, they said that Trilogy was created to appeal to a dedicated Star Wars Unlimited players who are looking to show off their deck building talents and matchup knowledge. So basically they're claiming that this format would be interesting for dedicated Star Wars Limited players, so basically people like me, people who play the game a lot. So basically the opposite of casual players who've been playing the game since the very beginning, who are very, very dedicated, who play the game a lot. And they are basically saying that this format requires more deck building talents and more matchup knowledge. So first of all, on the matchup knowledge, yes, I will agree. A format like this would definitely require more matchup knowledge, because now instead of knowing how to play only one deck, you need to be know how to play 3 decks, which is obviously a very big difference, because you're not only it triples the amount of different configuration that you have to consider and matchup that you have to understand. So you need to have a global knowledge of the format of the meta game, not only one specific deck with all of its potentially matchups. So in terms of matchup knowledge, there's no denying that a format like this would definitely be a lot more challenging and maybe a lot more difficult to master. And on this one, it's factually correct. There's nothing to say about it. However, on the second statement, the fact that it would actually enable people with deck building talent to show off their skills, and it's going to represent new deck building challenges. On this one, I think this is factually incorrect. And I think it's the absolute opposite, and I'm going to be explaining why. First of all, the ban list. There is a ban list, there's a suspension list for a reason. The reason why we have suspension list is because it's been proven that the cards that are on the ban list are basically stifling innovation. They are creating an environment that is extremely not diverse, extremely hostile. That makes it very difficult to innovate. Decks like Django, decks like Boba 1, decks like, even to some extent, to a lesser extent, Han 1 Yellow, those decks have proven to be stifling innovation. And in a format where you have to compete with very, very decks like this, there's going to be a lot of decks that are going to be very impossible to play. For example, any sort of Swarm deck is going to be impossible to play because of Django. Aggro in general, like Sabine, is going to be very difficult to play because of Django. Control is going to be very difficult to play because Boba 1 is just incredible against, and both Boba 1s and Han 1 yellows are just really, really powerful against both of these archetypes. So, I mean, obviously you can always ban the deck you don't like and kind of play around things. But overall, I don't think this will enable innovation. I think it's going to do the absolute opposite, where people are just going to be running those decks which are so far above anything else. There's innovation, there's option for innovation whenever we are in a very diverse format, where a lot of different archetypes can possibly exist because they don't have those super predator just dominating everything. The other factor that will limit innovation in a trilogy format is the fact that it's a lot harder to focus on building new decks and innovate when you have to learn 2 more decks. So if for anybody who's tried to build a brand new deck and try to push this deck for this deck to be competitive, you will realize that this is extremely time consuming. It's the most time consuming task. It's very fun and it's worth doing if you enjoy doing it, but in terms of what you get for the time that you spend, it's pretty bad. And in order to be successful with a deck that is a rogue deck or a deck that is out of the meta, you have to be playing a lot. You have to really, really tweak the list. You really have to playtest all the matchups. And even then, you might end up with a deck that is just inferior to what already exists. But the benefit is that even though your deck might be slightly worse, you are benefiting from the element of surprise, which can give you an advantage, and maybe that advantage will be enough to counterbalance. So it's very difficult. Basically testing new decks and trying to innovate is extremely time consuming. And now in a format like Trilogy, where you have to learn 2 additional decks on top of your pet deck that you're trying to innovate with, is going to be a lot more difficult because now you have to learn those 2 other decks. So in my opinion, as I said, it's a lot harder to focus on innovating whenever you have to learn 3 decks. So what is most likely going to happen is that players will be playing the 3 most well-known powerful deck. They are less incentivized to innovate because the punishment for not being able for spending too much time innovating while you could be spending more time actually learning the other decks is going to be higher. So the punishment for innovating is going to be higher. Finally, players who don't have time or are not good at deck building will net deck just all the same. It doesn't change the fundamental fact. If you really want to create a format that basically reward deck building, you should instead try to push draft or even cube drafting to a competitive level, if that's what you really want. If you really want to emphasize on deck building, you should be focusing on that, because that's really the only way to truly reward the players good at deck building. This is what we've been seeing in the Pro Tour. Used to be Magic the Gathering. You would always have draft being part of the highest stage of the competition, and you would have both draft and constructed both being format that people would be playing at a competitive level. And this is the only way, in my opinion, to reward proper deck building, because anything else, regardless of what you do, people will still basically just net deck all the same. And because people have even less time to focus on innovation, you're going to see even more net decking in this format than you would see otherwise. So yeah, just to summarize on the previous statement, I agree that this new format will definitely force you to have more matchup knowledge, and will probably be more skill intensive as style as piloting, but it will definitely be completely counterproductive from an innovation standpoint, and it will actually stifle innovation on many different aspects. The second statement they're also making is that as for the card limits, we implemented those primarily for 3 reasons. So what they're talking about, the card limit, is playing 3 cards across 3 different decks. No more than 3 cards of one exemplar across the 3 decks. First, we wanted to create more interesting deck building decisions. If player wants to include 3 copies of a particularly powerful card, they have to decide which deck needs those copies the most. So basically they're claiming that this format will create interesting deck building decision. For me, once again, that is not true at all. And the reason for this is because, especially with set 5 and as more sets roll in, since it's going to be they've said it's going to use the same deck building rules as Eternal, so that means it's an Eternal format. That means it's only going to grow and grow bigger and bigger in size as more sets are released. There are way enough cards to create 3 powerful decks that don't share any cards in common. You don't need to compromise on your deck. So what they're saying is like, oh yeah, you have to compromise and make interesting deck building decision. No, that's completely not true. It's a complete opposite. There's actually way enough cards in the card pool to create 3 super busted, powerful decks that share absolutely no cards in common. And actually, this will have the opposite effect of like, there are certain type of decks that are basically will be absolutely unplayable because they share too many cards in common with another deck that is just better. So basically, you could, for example, justify, let's say, playing a Catbane deck alongside a Boba deck, for example, because they're 2 very powerful decks, but because Boba is clearly the better deck, there will be no, and they share too many cards in common. You can't just build a Django deck and a Boba deck alongside each other without them bothering each other. Then people are simply just going to play the Boba deck. So it will literally kill certain type of decks. So it's actually not really working at all. There's absolutely zero challenge in building 3 distinct decks that only have to. You can build, for example, a Django Red, even decks that are in the similar colors. You can literally build a Django Red and a Boba Data Vault deck or a Boba Green deck, and those 2 decks would basically share no cards in common. Like there's only like a few cards they share. Like they're sharing, I think, stuff like they would share like 7th Feet Defender. Certain version would share P38. But they would share P38, but then P38 is just so much better in Django than it is in Boba. Boba is completely fine, just giving that up for Django. Then there's a couple of cards like Bazine is the same. Like Bazine is so much more beneficial for Boba, so Boba just played Bazine. Like they would share a few cards, but it would be very easy to determine which one actually goes in which deck. And with all the new card that gets added from set 3, set 4, and set 5, Boba the Vault would have no problem filling the gaps. And once again, it could be Boba Green or Boba Data Vault, and the deck would just be an absolute monster of a deck. Think about basically, it would just be an absolute monster of a deck. And then the third deck could be just a Han 2 Force deck, or it could be a Han 1 Yellow. Those decks absolutely share, once again, no cards in common with the 2 other decks. So you could literally build 3 yellow decks like Django Red, Boba Data Vault, and Han 1 Yellow, and basically without making any major compromises. So it's absolutely not challenging at all. And once again, this is a question that I want to ask you: do you really, really want to play a format where every people play at least a Django deck and a Boba deck? Is that really the kind of format you want to play in? Does that sound like a lot of fun? In my opinion, it doesn't sound fun at all. Like, once again, a format where DJ is back to be legal, all that stuff. Do you really want to play in a format where that's the thing? My answer is absolutely not. So then, once again, there's another argument that they've put forward, is that finally it was important to us that this format did not demand additional collecting from players. We wanted it to be an exciting new way to play Star Wars Unlimited, not a requirement that players go out and seek out more copies of hard-to-find cards. So basically what they're saying is like, hey, look, you don't need to be looking for more than 3 copies of something like Luke Skywalker. And I have to say, thank God we don't have to. But nonetheless, they will still need to build 3 decks instead of 1, which will make the game 3 times more expensive to get into. It's actually way more than 3 times more expensive, because if you are someone getting into Star Wars Limited, you usually like to play budget deck, and you can't just say, oh yeah, well, I can just build now 3 budget deck instead of 1. There's just not an infinite amount of supply of budget decks that you can build for a game, and often those budget decks would actually share card among each other. So building budget deck is pretty much going to be impossible now. You might get 1 budget deck among the 3 decks you're playing, but then the 2 other decks will have to be decks that are not budget at all. So that's like, it's going to make the game incredibly more expensive. Not only that, the higher demand of staples is going to make cards go up in price. The supplies remain the same. However, if this becomes the main way to play constructed competitive, and everybody now needs 3 decks instead of 1, you're going to see the demand for cards increasing across the board, and everybody's going to be wanting more cards. So it's going to make also every staples in the game more expensive. So, like for example, right now, you can definitely play loads of decks that don't run Luke Skywalker. If you're playing this format, good luck playing building 3 powerful decks and none of them have Luke. Like, this is going to be just a nightmare. So I think it's really, really bad idea. And it's going to make the game so much more difficult to get into. I'm personally all for FFG making more money, but it has to be reasonable, and it doesn't have to be at the expense. It shouldn't be at the expense of newcomers. If you want to make more money on collectors, make more money on people who are already deep into the game. But people like me, for us, for people who already have a full collection, this format makes no difference to us. We still we have all the cards anyway. It makes a difference for people who are new to the game, and that's the worst possible thing you could do. You want to monetize on people that are really deep into the game. You want to make people like me spend more money on the game. You want to make people like collectors spend more money on the game. You do not want to make the barrier to entry to the game higher. And that's what this would do if this was generalized to all competitive events. Some other objections that I have with this format that were not talked about in the article is that I find sideboards to be one of the most skill-intensive and interesting part of a trading card game. It's far more interesting than just, oh, I'm just going to ban my bad matchup. Like, having to actually think about how you can mitigate bad matchup, how you can add cards. It's a very skill-intensive part of the game. It's a very interesting part of the game, and it makes also one of the other benefit of this is that it makes it so there's a lot of cards that normally would not see any play in the game that actually see play because sideboard exists. So it's just you are removing a huge part of what makes the game interesting at a competitive level. So in my opinion, I am a big fan of sideboard, and I think sideboard are a far smarter and interesting way to allow the players to balance the game by themselves, rather than just saying, oh yeah, they're just going to ban their bad matchup. Because honestly, it's not going to be very interesting. Everybody's going to have a Django deck, and pretty much almost everybody, unless you have a specific plan against it, everybody's just going to ban Django right out of the gate and just play against the 2 other decks, which is not going to be very interesting. Also, another argument I have to say, like in Classic Premier, it is very easy and often worthwhile to target target and counter the meta. So let's say you want to build, let's say Django is everywhere. In the previous meta, you could basically say when Django was completely dominant, you could actually just build a deck that would specifically just beat Django. There are not many decks that could do that, but we saw it with, for example, the Bosk Blue that won Liverpool. It was possible to do that. And you know it's possible to do this because you know that you're going to be facing that deck most of the time. So it's really worthwhile to do this, and you're going to be playing a full best of 3 against that specific deck. In this case, countering decks is going to be a lot more difficult in this new format, because if you are building a deck that just counters a specific deck, you might not be facing that deck. Like this deck, the opponent is going to have 3 different decks. And also, you don't have a sideboard, so all of your counter cards needs to be in the main deck, which will make your deck worse in other matchups. So it's so much easier to counter specific meta if you are playing against only one deck across the entire best of 3, and if you have access to a sideboard to do that. So my big question that I'm asking to FFG is, who is this format for? I don't really understand what they're trying to do with this. Obviously, casual players, I think it's safe to assume that they have no interest in playing in a format where you get rewarded for running the most busted deck we've ever seen. Like, literally this format rewards players for running everything that has been busted in Star Wars Limited since the beginning. I don't see casual players having much interest in running into this pool of sharks that's going to be this Trilogy format. The second people that could be interesting in this is the competitive players. So first of all, this format for now is only going to be for casual play. There's not going to be any tournaments organized around this format. So from that point on, competitive players are not going to care at all about this until there's actually competition. And basically competitive players will play whatever competitive format is pushed by FFG. Unfortunately, they don't really have much of a choice. But if you give them the option, if you let them choose, I'm pretty sure that players would rather pick the format that doesn't have Django and Boba in it. I think it's once again, I cannot talk for everybody, but I think it's a safe assumption to make, and at least that's my opinion. And once again, if it's a format it's definitely not a format for new players, because they have to now collect 2 more decks, and obviously the fact that they now need a huge knowledge of the game to be able to play at a competitive level, because they have to learn 3 decks with all their matchup instead of 1. They are of course, you put them at a strong disadvantage. So you're making the game more elitist. You're making it's not for casual, it's not for competitive. Like, I just don't understand who is this format for. I don't understand what they're trying to do with this. Moving on to say, I just want to say that Pierre, you said in the past that you were very excited about Eternal, and Eternal is going to have everything legal. So I have 2 things to say about this. The first thing is that it's not because Eternal exists that necessarily everything is going to be legal in it. Like, you can create a format like Eternal, like formats in Magic like Modern or Legacy, which are the Eternal formats of Magic. They still have a ban list. So it's not because a format is Eternal that it has all the cards in it without any exception. You can definitely make a ban list or not. Talking about ban card, if you are excited about this new format, you can pick up DJ for €1 on Card Market. It's a legendary, a €1 legendary that will see a tremendous amount of play in Eternal and in this new Trilogy format, so might as well pick them up if you don't have them yet, if you have any intention to play this. And I guess if the prices of DJ do not go up in the next few weeks, I guess we'll get the answer on whether or not the community is actually excited about this format or not. So, even if the Trilogy format has the same ban list as Premiere, which is, I think, should be what should be done, at least at the beginning, I still far prefer the classic Premiere format, and I explain why. First of all, I already talked about it, but sideboards for me are an awesome part of the game. They enable new cards that would never see play otherwise to see play. They allow you to adapt to the meta easier. They are very skill intensive. They make the difference between the good players and the great players. They also enable you to create new strategy. It enables you to have more deck building freedom. It drives innovation as well, in a huge degree. So sideboard are awesome. The second is, like, obviously the classic Premiere format where you only need 1 deck to take part in a tournament is definitely more accessible to new players. All you get to do is 1 decks, and if this budget if your deck is relatively budget, you should be able to play at a competitive level and have a good chance of winning with a deck that costs less than 50 quid, which is awesome. It encourages innovation, as I explained earlier, because since you're only playing, you only have 1 deck to worry about, you can definitely spend a lot more time and a lot more attention in actually working on innovating on that specific deck, and the amount of research that is required to get this deck to fruition. And finally, it's easier to counter meta decks. It's easier to counter a meta deck. It's easier to balance the meta whenever there's only 1 deck you have to worry about in every single match that you're playing, and when you have access to a sideboard. And this is the reason why, even if the Trilogy format was going to adapt the ban list of Premiere, I still would prefer to play the classic Premiere format. And I think that this classic Magic the Gathering format is, in my opinion, far superior to the digital card game format that we saw in Hearthstone, Legend of Runeterra, and all those other games. I might be understand. Once again, I don't want to give FFG evil's intention, because I think that they've been very pro-consumers, but there's of course always this suspicion that they might do this in order to push players to buy more cards because obviously collecting 3 decks instead of 1 is more expensive. And I think I don't think it's a good business strategy, because once again here you are making the game more expensive, but you're not making the game more expensive for actually the super big dedicated players. You're making them more expensive for the players who want to get into the game. So once again, I think that it's very important in business to always try to find ways to monetize off the very dedicated players instead of making the game just more expensive to get into for newcomers. And so just as a broader, I'm just going to broaden the conversation a little bit, and I think it just is way too early to create a new official format for Star Wars Unlimited. Each format should serve a specific purpose in the ecosystem. So for example, draft is great because it makes people buy more packs. It's a really unique way to play the game. It makes you play with cards that you will never play otherwise. It emphasizes on deck building, but deck building with a random card pool instead of just net decking. It's a great way to play the game, and that's why it exists. Twin Suns is an amazing format because it creates this social multiplayer experience where people get to play with their friends. It's a very casual way to play the game, and it's actually, in terms of gameplay, radically different from the other formats. So Twin Suns serve its purpose. And obviously Premiere is the primary way to play the game. It's the competitive format, and it's what people kind of play at a competitive level. And then finally, you got Eternal, and Eternal is very important because it gives us another competitive way to play the game. But Eternal is great because it gives a second life to card that rotates out. You cannot create a rotating format and just say, okay, now the card that you've collected, they are worthless, you can't play with them anymore. No, you need, in the ecosystem, it's essential that there's a way for players to play those cards that rotated out into a new format, and being able to continue to have fun with those cards and create a new way to play the game that is radically, once again, as the Eternal format gets bigger and bigger, and as the Premiere format continue to rotate out, those two formats, Eternal and Premiere, are going to become more and more different from one another, which are going to create two very great way to play the game and exciting. And I think for the next, at least, I'm going to say this, but for the next 5 years, you don't need anything else. Those 4 formats, those 4 pillars of the game. So you got the draft, you got the Premiere, you got the Eternal, and you got the Twin Suns. Those 4 pillars are more than enough to support the game for the next 10 years as an official format. And you always have to consider that every time you create a new format, you create the risk of dividing your community. And it's not a good idea to divide your community when your community is not even that big to begin with. The problem with this new Trilogy format is that it's not really complementing the other formats. It's competing with the Premiere format. It's literally competing against it because it is a constructed competitive format. It's either competing with Premiere. I mean, right now it's going to be competing with Premiere, and when Premiere rotates out, it's going to be competing with Eternal. So it really doesn't serve any purpose other than just being disruptive to the community, and I really don't understand, once again, what's the end goal with this format. I think that if they really think that the Conquest type format is better than the classic Premiere format that we have, then it should replace it. It should not just be competing with it. Maybe that's just an experiment. They're trying to basically put the format out and see which one prevails. But the real answer to that question is like, nothing is going to prevail. What's going to prevail is going to be the one that is legal in competitive. And so at some point, FFG is going to have to make a choice which of the two formats they want to privilege. And in my opinion, they should choose the Premiere format for all the reasons I already explained in the video. For anybody who is excited about this new format just because it's something new to try out with their friends, I'm just telling you, nobody is preventing you from finding new ways to play the game for your friends. Myself, I've organized and created many fun formats that I'm playing with my friends. I've played cube drafting with my friends. I've played thematic 2v2 battles. I even posted a video on my channel called the Epic Battle that you can check it out, where it's literally recreating the Battle of Geonosis with Star Wars Unlimited. I've also created just Twin Suns, but 2v2 instead of just one for all. We've played all those crazy fun formats, and we don't need FFG. If you find cool ways to play the game, you don't need FFG's permission to play them. You just play them. Like casual format, like this, spontaneous casual format, you don't need FFG's permission to create them. And I think that once again, creating an official format is taking the risk, once again, of dividing the community, especially when those formats are actually competing with existing formats in the game. So maybe FFG will release a statement, and even maybe why not answering that video and explain a little bit more what is the end goal with this format, or maybe I've missed an information. You guys can share with me what you think. Do you like this new format? Do you dislike it? Do you agree or disagree with some of the stuff I've said in my video? Anyway, this is going to be an interesting discussion. I personally don't honestly think that this format will be, at least as long as FFG is not forcing this format down our throat by being the default competitive format. I honestly don't think that this will be a good way. I don't think this format is going to be successful at all. I don't think people are going to be wanting to play against Django, Boba, Madness. I don't think that's going to be an attractive format for most people, unless, once again, they force it down our throat. So I'm not really too worried about it, but I'm just a little bit surprised and a little bit dazed by this decision from FFG to push this new idea. I just don't really see the point. Thank you so much for following that video. And if you like the content, please like and subscribe, and I'll see you next time.